All right, guys. Today we're going to learn about the cell cycle. So just like plants have a life cycle, animals have a life cycle, humans have a life cycle, cells have a life cycle too. And part of that life cycle is them dividing to make daughter cells. We'll learn all about it. All right, so the first phase of the cell cycle is called G1. This stands for gap 1, and this is when the cell grows a lot. The next phase is called S phase. The S stands for synthesis, and when you synthesize something, it means you're making something, and in this case, the cell is making a copy of its DNA. So we say that it replicates its DNA. When you make a replica of something, you're making a copy. So it replicates, not of DNA, replicates its DNA. And you might be wondering why it needs to do that. Well, later on in the cell cycle, the cell is going to divide into 2 daughter cells, and it needs a full set of DNA for each daughter cell. Now, I want to take a brief little moment during S phase to talk about the cell's DNA. So usually in the cell, the DNA is all kind of spread out in the nucleus where it's kept. But when the cell is getting ready to divide, the DNA condenses into these forms called chromosomes. And so this is what a chromosome looks like. This picture here. Okay, chromosome. The structure that holds it together in the middle is called a centromere. It's in the center, so centromere. Now, this picture over here then is what this chromosome would look like after it's been copied. So there's one side, and then the other side is its copy. So this is what S phase does. So this is a chromosome after, we call it replication. When you make a replica of something, you're making a copy. So this is after DNA replication in S phase. And what we call each of these halves is we call them sister chromatids. And they are an exact copy of each other. Chromatids. There we go. Okay, now back to the cell cycle. The next phase is called G2, or gap 2. Gap 2. And this is when the cell prepares to divide. The cell is about to divide, and so it gets ready. Ooh, prepares to divide. All right, and that moves us into then cell division. We call that M phase, which stands for mitosis. Okay. And then there are 4 different phases of mitosis. So in here, we're just going to put the letter abbreviation, and then we'll talk about each one later. So it goes prophase, metaphase, anaphase, telophase. And at the end of it, what happens is the cell actually splits into 2, and that is called cytokinesis. So we'll just put a C there. So we have mitosis. That is when the cell divides. So we can write that down here. Cell division. And we'll talk about each of these in just a minute. But that is the cell cycle. So now we're going to talk about cell division. But before we do, I want to talk about why do cells need to divide, right? Why can't they just go on growing and growing and growing? Well, if you think about it, the cell is producing a lot of wastes And the cell needs a lot of things, right? It needs oxygen, it needs glucose. And so eventually, as the cell's getting bigger, it needs more of those things, and it's producing more waste, and eventually there isn't enough surface area, or the cell membrane, to get all the waste out and to get all the things it needs in. So we say that the cell needs to have a good surface area to volume ratio. All right, so now, cell division, when the cell divides. The first phase of this is called prophase. And so in prophase, the chromosomes condense, so the DNA turns from a big, mass of DNA into those chromosomes, those X-shaped chromosomes. In metaphase, which is phase 2, those X-shaped chromosomes line up along the middle of the cell. They're getting ready to split, so they line up along the middle M, metaphase. Anaphase is the third phase of mitosis, and so in this one, those chromosomes that were lined up along the middle, they split in two. The sister chromatids split apart and move to opposite ends of the cell. All right, telophase then is the fourth phase of mitosis, and in this phase, the two new daughter cells start forming their nucleus. So their chromosomes clump up and start to form a nucleus. Now, cytokinesis happens at the end of mitosis, and this is when we have two identical daughter cells and their cytoplasm gets split. So this is when they actually form two separate cells. Now, I have a little hand trick to remember mitosis. It's pretty slick. So, what I do, take my two hands, put them like this. This represents prophase because here I have, my fingers are representing the chromosomes that have condensed into that form. So prophase, metaphase, see how they're all lined up along the middle. Anaphase, they split, those sister chromatids. Telophase, and then, lastly, cytokinesis. So let's do it again. We have prophase, metaphase, anaphase, telophase, cytokinesis.